The depths of grief. Losing my anchor. When I lost my father, my world fell apart in a way I never could have anticipated. I always knew, in the back of my mind, that one day he wouldn't be here, but nothing prepares you for the reality of that loss. It wasn't just the physical absence of him that was unbearable, though that in itself was devastating. It was the emotional and psychological unraveling that came with it, the sense that a part of me had been ripped away, leaving a gaping hole that I had no idea how to fill. I still remember the day he passed like it was yesterday. I was in the hospital room, holding his hand, and I felt the moment his spirit left his body. It was like watching the light in his eyes dim, and I couldn't stop it. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and all I could think was, what am I going to do now? My father had been my rock, my guide, my constant source of wisdom and strength. And in that moment, I felt like I had lost not only him, but also my sense of direction in life. In the weeks and months that followed, I was consumed by grief. It was like walking through a dense fog, unable to see clearly, unable to feel anything except a crushing sadness that weighed on me every waking moment. Every little thing reminded me of him. A song on the radio, a familiar scent, even the way the light hit the dining room table where we used to sit and talk. It all brought a wave of emotion that I couldn't hold back. I would break down at the most unexpected times, tears falling without warning, as the reality of his absence continued to sink in. What made it even harder was that, despite the outpouring of sympathy from friends and family, I felt completely and utterly alone. People would tell me they understood, but I could tell that most didn't. They tried to comfort me with words like, "He's in a better place," or "He's always with you," but those sentiments felt hollow. I didn't want to hear that he was in a better place. I wanted him here, with me. I wanted to talk to him, hug him, hear his laugh, and share my life with him. And no amount of comforting words could bring that back. I felt guilty for not moving on fast enough. It seemed like everyone around me expected that, after a few months, I would be okay again. But I wasn't. In fact, as time went on, the pain seemed to intensify. The first holidays without him were unbearable. His birthday passed, and I didn't know what to do with myself. There were days when I couldn't get out of bed, when the weight of his absence felt so heavy that I could barely breathe. I didn't know how to grieve, or if I was grieving the right way. All I knew was that the loss of my father had torn apart the fabric of my life, and I didn't know how to put it back together again. Numbness and the desire to escape. As the weeks turned into months, I fell into a deep state of numbness. It wasn't that I wasn't feeling the pain, I was. But it was like my mind and body couldn't handle the intensity of it anymore, so I just started to shut down. I withdrew from friends and family, stopped doing the things I loved, and found myself lost in a haze of avoidance. I kept telling myself that if I just stayed busy enough, if I distracted myself long enough, maybe the pain would go away. But it didn't. It lingered, like a shadow that I couldn't escape, no matter how fast or far I ran. I tried to fill the void with anything I could. I threw myself into work, thinking that if I could focus on something else, maybe I wouldn't have to face the reality of my grief. But it didn't help. Every time I sat down at my desk, the silence around me would remind me of what was missing. I would get halfway through an email or a task, and suddenly, a memory of my father would flood my mind, and I would be paralyzed by a wave of sorrow. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't function. I was stuck. I even started pushing people away. I couldn't bear to be around friends who still had their parents, who seemed to be living their lives without a care in the world. I felt like no one understood the depth of my pain, and I didn't want to burden anyone with the heaviness I was carrying. So I isolated myself, thinking that maybe solitude would offer some relief. But it only made things worse. The turning point. Acknowledging the grief eventually, I realized that running from my grief wasn't working. It was consuming me from the inside out, and I had to face it head-on if I ever wanted to heal. It wasn't an easy realization. It came after months of hitting rock bottom, of feeling like I was drowning in a sea of sorrow with no life raft in sight. I reached out to a grief counselor after a particularly difficult day. I remember sitting in her office, barely able to speak through my tears, as I poured out everything I had been holding in. It was the first time I had allowed myself to fully express the depth of my loss. The counselor listened without judgment, without offering empty platitudes, and that was exactly what I needed. I needed someone to hear me, to validate my pain, and to help me understand that there was no right way to grieve. The counselor introduced me to the idea that grief isn't something you get over, it's something you learn to live with. She explained that the loss of a parent leaves a permanent imprint on your life, and while the pain may never fully go away, it's possible to integrate that loss into your life in a way that allows you to move forward. It was a concept I had never considered before, and it gave me a new perspective on what I was going through. Over time, I began to find ways to honor my grief rather than fight it. I started journaling, pouring out my thoughts and emotions onto the page without censoring myself. It became a cathartic release, a way to give voice to the sorrow that had been locked inside me for so long. I also began to reconnect with the things that brought me joy, slowly at first, but with time I started to feel like I was reawakening to life. Embracing the journey of healing. Healing wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, only to be knocked down by a sudden wave of grief. But I learned to be patient with myself, to allow myself to feel whatever emotions came up without judgment. I learned that healing is a journey, not a destination, and that it's okay to take small steps, even if they feel insignificant at the time. I began to lean on the support of others more, realizing that I didn't have to carry this burden alone. Friends who had experienced their own losses became my lifeline, offering advice and sharing their own stories of grief and healing. We would meet for coffee and talk for hours about the complexities of loss, the guilt, the anger, the sadness, and, eventually, the moments of peace that would slowly start to appear. I also started honoring my father's memory in new ways. Instead of focusing on the void his absence had created, I began to celebrate the legacy he left behind. I would visit places that had been meaningful to him, cook his favorite meals, and tell stories about him to those who hadn't known him. It became a way to keep his spirit alive in my life, even though he was no longer physically here. The game changer. Echoes of absence. Navigating grief after losing a parent, but the real breakthrough in my healing journey came when I stumbled upon a book called Echoes of Absence. Navigating grief after losing a parent, it felt like fate, finding this book when I was finally ready to confront my grief in a deeper way. The book offered profound insights into the unique pain of losing a parent and validated so many of the feelings I had been struggling with. Reading the book was like having a compassionate guide walk with me through my grief. It provided practical advice on how to navigate the overwhelming emotions, offered comfort in knowing that I wasn't alone, and helped me understand that grief doesn't have a timeline. The exercises in the book helped me process my emotions in a healthier way, and the stories from others who had gone through similar losses made me feel seen and understood. Most importantly, the book gave me hope. It showed me that, while the pain of losing a parent never fully goes away, it is possible to find joy and meaning in life again. If you're struggling with the loss of a parent, I can't recommend Echoes of Absence enough. It was a game changer for me, helping me navigate the darkest moments of my grief and guiding me toward healing. If you're feeling lost like I was, this book could be the support you need to move forward, one step at a time.